Hi, this is Dustin with Dustin's Dollars. Today I'm going to be giving an update on Bed Bath & Beyond and the potential for a short squeeze slash gamma squeeze going on with this particular stock. Before I begin, let me remind you that I am not a financial advisor or a financial professional of any sort. All opinions that I express in this video are mine and do not represent those of any company or any other individual. I currently hold a very small, long position in Bed Bath & Beyond, so this video should be for your entertainment purposes only because I could be wrong about everything I say in this video. You need to do your own research before making any investment decisions. So, since I last spoke up Bed Bath & Beyond about 2 weeks ago, there's been a lot that has happened. You look at just the stock, obviously it's gone down and then it's come back up just a tiny bit, another 20% or so off the bottom there that we saw in this past 5 days. But a lot has happened, right? And the number one thing, we actually had that news from the company in there's a press release and a conference, a short conference even. A couple things, right? They got rid of some executives. They are closing some stores. And then the bigger news that number one, they have access to another, more than $500 million worth of financing of new debt. And then the other big, huge update, in my opinion, I don't even know where it is, that they are not going to get rid of BBBY Baby. They're not spinning it off or doing anything with it yet. Maybe it wasn't even in this 8K. Maybe it's in another press release. Sorry, I didn't have my tabs organized very well today, apparently. But those were some big updates. And then they also announced that they are filing for an at-the-money offering program. So they're going to be offering more shares of stock and issuing more stock there. And so these were all, not good for the potential short squeeze thesis. And they actually, I think, took away a lot of the momentum. There's the other humongous news, of course, that the CFO died, apparently by suicide, which, putting a lot of other things aside, at least raises the risk and this potential suspicion of, there could have been, could be some fraud going on. And so that's also, I think, another thing that spooked a lot of people. And then, of course, the stock is no longer on the regulation SHO threshold list, which means there have been enough of the failure to delivers that have been closed out so that the stock is no longer suffering from a large quantity of failures to deliver, right? So I think that means that the number of FTDs has to be under 0.5% of the outstanding shares of the stock. So that whatever forced buying that had to occur in order to close those out did actually happen. And we didn't see the stock price reflect a humongous upswing. So that again was also a momentum killer for the short squeeze thesis. And we've also seen that the rate of increase for folks talking about Bed Bath & Beyond, and again, I use this as a proxy metric, has gone down. This proxy metric here is the number of members in the Bed Bath & Beyond stock subreddit on Reddit. And you can see this graph here. Let me see if I can make that a little larger. See, the number of subscribers was going up and up. Whoops. Wow. That need to work on their website layouts a little bit. It had going up and up and up. And then it's starting to level off now. Obviously, more people are still joining, but the rate of change there, the first derivative, if you're into, if you've taken calculus, is much lower than it was. And so that says that the momentum is slowing for people being interested, retail investors at least being interested in the stock. And the cost to borrow shares for shorting is actually down. We've seen that the cost to borrow was sky high. In at one point, I think above 100%, it's in the 50s and 30s. Now it's, as of Friday, it was down at about 15% range here. And so these are all effectively momentum killers for a short squeeze. However, it raises the question, right, of is the potential short squeeze over? Is it gone? And in my opinion, I'm going to give some data to back this up, and some of my, how I form my opinion here is I don't think the potential remains, but the momentum is gone, right? And so this is, again, sort of like it was a powder keg. And before, if you look back a couple of weeks when the stock had been going up like crazy, it was a powder keg and there was a fire that had started. At some point somebody threw a blanket on and has put that fire out. That's effectively what's happened. If I'm going to make a sort of a bad analogy for you to think about here, but in my opinion, the stock is still a powder keg, and if we happen to see increased retail interest, increased momentum for whatever reason, I think you could still see a repeat, and you could see this. You could see the stock blow well past $30 if this were to happen again. And let me give my rationale as to why I think this is still such an interesting situation that has at least asymmetric potential upside versus a downside. So I already talked about this, but the cost to borrow is still high, right? It is still 15%, which is drastically higher than it has been for a long, long, long time, right? If you look all the way up until even August, the cost to borrow was, for a while, it was 1%, 1.7%, and then it spiked, to 8% and 5%. We're still at double that. And liquidity for the shares, at least again according to this is data I think pulled from the IEX exchange, is still very thin. On some days we see practically no shares available to borrow, to short, and so that tells me that there is still sort of this imbalance in the stock in terms of liquidity. And going back to the actual numbers that I showed here in terms of retail interest, it is still growing, right? And this is still a non-trivial number of people, right? You have 30,000, 35,000 roughly people who are interested in it now. And this is the sort of thing that has leveled off now, but whatever catalyst could happen that could spike interest could see another drastic increase again, right? This is the sort of thing that grows virally, not linearly. And so, we went from, when I can't see I have to zoom this out a little bit so we can see in July, at the end of June, there was roughly 7,000 people interested in it. And then at the end of, well, I guess it's 2 months, in the end of August, you see 34,000 people, right? And that is a sort of explosive growth of a movement like this that you could see, or of a subject that folks are interested in. And so I think that potential still remains, right? This is a larger base to grow off of, where if 30,000 people is much larger than the 7,000 people, where if momentum does pick up for whatever reason, you could see this, grow from 30,000 up to 100,000 this time, rather than only growing another, I'd say only growing another 20,000 members. So I still think that remains. And then just to throw this out there in terms of the sentiment, Bed Bath & Beyond, at least according to this, I've used the site before, this memebergterminal.com that scrapes Reddit and has analytics about which stocks are talked about. Bed Bath & Beyond remains the number one individual stock, right? It's effectively tied here with the S&P 500, and it is 40% more talked about, 40% higher than the next individual stock, which is GameStop. And I mean, GameStop just had earnings this past week, so in addition to being sort of a meme stock that folks talk about, I would expect that to even be a little more talked about in this past week, because I think they had earnings, whereas Bed Bath & Beyond did not. But yet you still see Bed Bath & Beyond as the number one most talked about stock. So I think the potential still remains for these. And going to the number that actually matters, right? The short interest is still outstanding at a large percent of the shares, right? This is the most recently posted data from Ortex as of Friday after the market closed, and I'm looking at this number in the top right corner here for the estimate. Oops, let me see if I can scroll in here. The estimate for the actual short interest. Again, this is an estimate. This is not the exact number. We won't know the exact number until the exchange reported data comes out in, I think there should be a number reported this week, and that would be for the data as of August 31st, if I'm getting that right. I could be wrong, but that's what I off the top of my head what sounds about right. And they are estimating that the short interest here is 25 million shares still, which is, what's that, 30% of the total outstanding shares, and they even calculate as 32%, I guess, of the float. And again, I have my own opinion on what it means to calculate the float. I think it's a bit of a sort of hand wavy number here. It doesn't have a lot of basis in reality necessarily, but it's a substantial portion of the whole shares of the company, right? With 80 million shares roughly outstanding, 25 million is a lot. So all of those things remain. If we look at the options data, I know I've done this a couple times, so if you're familiar with my prior videos, this should make sense to you. I grabbed the open interest on all the call options in the stock at the end of day Friday. And the total open interest in terms of the calls is we have, 810,000 calls, which is more than this is slightly increased from the last time I took a look at the data 2 weeks ago. And this represents more than all of the shares of the company combined. And, of course, some calls could be sort of canceling each other out where somebody both buys and sells a call. However, this is, even with some of that, right, this still represents a lot of shares in the company. And in particular, when you look at how many of these are out of the money, which I think, I think a majority of these are, right? Because I have this table that I have here is showing at each expiration, and then the first column is showing the total open interest. But then each column here is looking at this very top number for if the stock hits this particular value, how many of those call options would be in the money. And then you can look down and see what the numbers are at each individual point, because this represents all of the call options that would be in the money at that strike. And then if you look at the bottom here, that represents the total number of call options, across all the expiration dates at that strike price that would be in the money. And the conclusion that I draw from this, again, I shouldn't say again, but a couple of conclusions are, number one, there is a ton of open interest in the January option chain. In total, just on that January date in 2023, there's almost half of the shares of the company represented by outstanding call options. So I think this is ridiculous. That's a humongous number. And then the other bit here is if you look at how many will be in the money, if for what, again, this is, you can draw your own conclusions, but I think if the stock were to hit back at just above $15, you're going to see, 21 million shares worth of call options hitting in the money, across all of the expiration dates. And then if the stock does continue to rise and rise and rise, you just see so many more options go in the money, at 20 and 30 and 45. And then obviously if they hit that $80 strike where just that humongous pile of options from January 2023 goes in the money, that represents just that shift up from 45 to 80. And I know that sounds like a humongous jump. That's almost a 2x in the price. But again, this is the whole point of that sort of gamma ramp, where once stock starts going up, it's going to have this upward momentum that sort of creates a feedback loop where it goes up even more as folks are hedging their hedging the risks that their call options that they have sold are actually going to go in the money. I also present the same data here. Let me show you the same data, but looking at what percent each one of these. So this is the exact same data, except it is represented as a percent of the outstanding shares, right? Just so you can get a sense here, rather than me sort of doing the conversion for you. You can see, again, as of on that January 2023 expiration date for the call options, we see that 47% of the outstanding shares of the company are covered by call options. So that's huge. And then again, we see if the stock happened to hit above that $80 price, then we can see that there are call options open that represent more than all of the outstanding shares of the company. So that's pretty huge. And if we then instead look at this as a percent of my definition, my look at the float. My float here, my calculation is 58.6 million shares. I come to this by looking at all the outstanding shares, right? The 79 point whatever million shares is roughly 80. I did the math a bit ago, so I did use the real number, but sort of the 80 million shares outstanding, and then I subtracted off what is held by insiders, what is held by Vanguard, and what is held by BlackRock, right? And I based that off of the behavior of both Vanguard and BlackRock in the GameStop squeeze, where they actually held on to most of their shares as the stock went up and went back down. They just held it. And again, this makes sense because those folks are mostly just a large portion of the reason why they're holding the shares, because they are holding index funds or other other mutual funds or ETFs that are more passive in nature. Um, and so I subtract those shares off, assuming that those are not covered by call options. Those are just shares that are held and are going to be held throughout this whole time. Similarly for the insiders, again, we don't know what they will do. We have seen, at least the CFO had sold out of some shares, um, but we don't know what those insiders would do. All of the other insiders so far, I think, have held on to their shares, even as the stock went to $30. So hard to say what would happen in that scenario. But again, if I remove those shares and I use that as my denominator for the float, you can see that there's actually the numbers are even higher, right? That the total outstanding call options represent 130% of the float. And in fact, if we got to even $15 of the outstanding call options, you see we have 34% of the float would be represented by in the money call options at that point and presumably change hands. And then you can see as it goes up and up and up, that number gets even higher. And at $80, you have more than all of the float represented by call options at that point. So combine that with the short, again, the potential for a gamma ramp, this gamma squeeze that could happen if the price momentum does grow and the price does start going up. Combine that with the short interest where folks might start closing out of those short positions, sort of just to reduce their exposure. This still, in my opinion, does seem like there's a lot of potential for something to happen here. There again, so we've seen some negative things that have killed the momentum so far. It's hard to say what will happen in the future. I don't think there's a high probability this is going to happen, but I do think that if it happens, because of all of these open options, because of all of the short interest, you could see the stock go up very quickly. Very quickly to $30 and potentially beyond. So I think there is still potential here for this to happen. Again, I am still holding my admittedly small position in Bed Bath & Beyond, and I hold a small position because of, again, I feel like there is asymmetric upside versus the downside here, where if this does happen, and again, I don't know what the probability is, but if it does happen, you can see this because of all sort of these technical indicators, these technical factors that have to actually do with the stock, not sort of any fundamental analysis on the company, but you can see that this could go, 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x. The stock price could go very, very high. Whereas again, in terms of your downside, you just are buying shares, you have just 100% downside risk rather than anything crazy. So that is where I stand on this, and that is the data that I'm using to form my opinion here. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a good day. Take care.